I'm back, and so now we want to talk about what igneous rocks are. So we're going to start off with igneous rocks because they were the first rocks to form on Earth. So if you recall that when the Earth formed, it was partially molten, and so there was a lot of volcanic activity going on, and so the surface of the Earth was covered in igneous rocks. So we're going to begin our tour of the different kinds of rocks with the igneous rocks. Now here are some examples of igneous rocks. Now at this point you don't need to know the names of these rocks because this is just an introduction to it. But you might recognize granite over there. That was the speckly one. And so continents tend to be composed of granite. Next to it is basalt. And basalt is very important because basalt is what the ocean floor is basically composed of. The one that's underneath that, that's scoria, and you might notice that it has holes in it, and that's where gas was being released by that particular rock as it was forming. And then the one next to it is called obsidian, and it is basically volcanic glass and is very sharp, and so like Indians would use that to make arrowheads out of. Now, where are you going to find igneous rocks, and then how do they form? So igneous rocks are formed from a melt. So when this molten material is inside the earth, then we call it magma. And then when it comes to the surface and oozes out, then we're going to call it lava. So when either magma or lava cools and it becomes crystalline, then that's going to be an igneous rock. So where are igneous rocks going to form? Well, if you recall from a previous lesson when we talked about plate tectonics, we need to be talking about places where it's extremely hot. So one place would be at a mid-ocean ridge. So where you've got two plates that are spreading apart, and then hot material from the asthenosphere is coming up. So then you have these volcanic mountains in the middle of an ocean. And so that would be a good place to find igneous rocks. It's very hot there. You're going to have lots of magma and lots of lava. Another place might be at a subduction zone. So that would be where you've got an ocean plate and it's colliding with could be a continental plate, and then it goes underneath it and it gets very, very hot, and then the lighter materials start to melt. They float up to the surface, and then you're going to have volcanic mountains. Okay, but then you could also have an ocean colliding with an ocean. They both try to go down, but whichever one is the colder plate wins, and it goes underneath it, and then the lighter materials go up, and then you're going to have volcanic islands. Another place that you might want to look would be a hot spot. So a hot spot out in the middle of an ocean would be just where you just got this big blob of magma underneath the ocean rock, and it's constantly sending up magma to form islands in the middle of a plate. Or you could have one of these hot spots underneath a continent, such as Yellowstone National Park. So basically any place where you're going to have temperatures high enough to melt or partially melt rock, this is going to be a good place to be looking for igneous rocks. Okay, now how do we identify igneous rocks? Now don't panic when you see this picture, because we're going to come back to it later when we talk about the origins of igneous rocks. But what I want you to see is that igneous rocks are basically going to be categorized according to their mineral content and then their texture. Now you'll notice that depending on the type of igneous rock, So we're going to have mafic rock, we're going to have intermediate igneous rock, and then we're going to have felsic rock. So those are your basic kinds of igneous rocks, and each of those three categories is going to have a certain assemblage of minerals in it. So the mineral content is going to tell you something about the igneous rock. Now let's take a look at the textures. So we mentioned that scoria has holes in it, so that would be a kind of texture. Others have very large crystals. Others have very, very small crystals in them. And we also mentioned volcanic glass, which has absolutely no crystals in it because it's a glass. So a combination of knowing the texture of the igneous rock and knowing what it's composed of is going to allow us to categorize different kinds of igneous rocks. So again, we're going to come back to this in a future lesson, and we're going to learn about this in more detail.